So I think we will make a start. So my name's Michelle Singleton, and I'm chairing today's webinar. I'm the lead for climate change in our policy unit, and I've been coordinating a lot of this work, but not without the help of a lot of people behind the scenes. And we're going to the schedule today is that I'll give a bit of an outline about where UNISON is generally on climate change, and apologies to those of you who've heard a lot of this before, particularly from me, but there'll be people in the room who perhaps haven't yet, and it won't be the full thing again, even if you have. And then I'll move on to Neve, who's our local government lead for climate change, to speak a little more in depth about the impacts, particularly on local government, and the results of a survey that was conducted recently, specifically amongst our local government members. And then we're lucky to have Sam Perry from the TUC, who's going to be speaking to us as well. They are the policy lead at the TUC on their climate workforce. But actually that doesn't really describe the role. It's quite a large role, and it's expanded perhaps beyond what he expected it to over the last couple of years. But he's extremely experienced, and most importantly was one of our green reps in the Unison branch in Harrogate, and is really going to be speaking about the experience on the ground of how that went, setting that up, and the kind of things that worked and perhaps didn't work as well. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen and doing that brief, hopefully brief, I'll try and be brief, introduction to Unison generally and climate change. So I'm going to share my screen. And start my presentation. So, yeah, Unison and climate change. Well, for those of you who aren't aware, we have been active on this issue of climate change since we formed in 1993, and actually in some of the partner unions before then. We were a founder member of TUSDAC, which is the TUC organisation. They lead it, and it's the Trade Union Sustainable Development Action Committee, and that formed in 1998. And Unison was the first union to sign up to the International Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is very hard to say. We did that just in 2024, but we were the first union to do so. And our members are increasingly seeing the impact on their jobs, their families, and their communities, and are rightly demanding that Unison is active on climate change, with our last member-wide survey saying that 90% of our members were concerned about the impacts. So I'm just going to run through some of the basic facts about climate change and where we are right now, the fact that this is a climate emergency. So right now, pollution alone causes more excess deaths than war, drugs, malaria, HIV, and alcohol combined. Extreme weather events are more frequent and causing thousands of excess deaths globally and here in the UK. And last year we had a new disease carrying mosquitoes for the first time in the UK due to the warmer climate. And although that particular disease affected, I think it was blackbirds on this occasion, that's not great in itself, but it is just a sign of the different concerns that are going to be increasing because of our warmer climates. And of course, that's just, the UK. That would be spanning out globally to wider climate effects as well. And the Environment Agency, just at the end of last year, announced that 1 in 4 homes will be at risk of flooding by 2050 in England alone. And we know that our devolved nations have similar figures there as well. And scientists are now clear that a 2% climate increase would mean a change in the Atlantic current circulation that would have most of the UK frozen for between 3 and 5 months of the year. So that's 3 months in the southern part of the UK and 5 months of the year in Scotland. And that's still with increasing temperatures and heat waves in our summers. So essentially, if we allow the situation to get to that point, and we are going to be at tipping points quite soon, then for the UK, that would mean that growing our food becomes impossible at that point, and we'd be relying on other countries for all of our food, not to mention how unpleasant it'll be to live in a country where it is essentially frozen for between 3 and 5 months of the year. So let's bring it a little bit closer to home. What are the impacts on public services? So we know that climate change directly impacts on public finances because of the costs of dealing with the impacts, on public health because of the impacts on all of our health. The cost of living crisis, food and energy is much more expensive when supply chains chains are disrupted through extreme weather events. And the education and skills agenda will be changing so that we meet the skills, new skills and jobs required to mitigate and adapt to the new climate realities. And it affects essentially all other areas of public policy as well. And many of you will know that already. But it's also the case that the financial and human cost of doing nothing far outweighs the cost of action. So when people talk about the cost of getting to net zero, the cost of climate action, they're sort of conveniently neglecting the cost of not doing anything on climate action, which our independent climate change commission fully agree, as does any serious commentator, that the costs of doing nothing are much greater than the cost of the action that are being proposed. And our members are at the front line of preventing, preparing for, and protecting against climate change. The majority of the jobs that our members do are either directly related to this work or absolutely affected by climate change right now. And we also have members who are working in the energy sector who are rightly concerned about how their jobs might be affected by the transition away from fossil fuels as well. And of course, working conditions are increasingly getting uncomfortable and unsafe, directly linked to extreme weather and climate change impacts. So public services and just transition. Just transition is a phrase that will probably be picked up by Sam, I expect, but just to run through it, it's a phrase that is often used and everyone who sort of talks in climate circles understands, but it's perhaps a bit meaningless for anyone who's not speaking about it all the time. But it essentially means that all the changes that are necessary, and we are clear that change is necessary, everything that I've said before hopefully sort of is a brief encapsulation of understanding that change is necessary. But just because change is necessary doesn't mean it shouldn't and mustn't be done in an absolutely fair way. So we know that the necessary transition to a greener way of working, to a greener economy, a greener country and planet, must be fair or just, and it must leave no one behind. That changing jobs should be protected, training should be provided, and proper investment is going to be needed for the increasing demands. We know that our position and the position of the TUC and all unions is that workers and the communities, not just workers, but also the communities that the workers serve, should be part of the conversation and have influence over those changes, and that no groups should be disproportionately disadvantaged. And we know that there are the usual disadvantaged groups are already disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. And if you want to know more about that, then you want to be coming to the webinars that we've got scheduled later in the year that will deal directly with all of our self-organised groups while they explain the particular impacts on their areas. But there are also opportunities and benefits to the huge transformations, changes, and investment that's going to be necessary and that's already happening. And we're also clear that those benefits should be shared equally and not just hoarded in one particular area. But everyone needs to feel that there's something in it for them, because the changes that are going to be required are probably going to be quite challenging. So just to touch briefly on the general scale of transformation required in public services, which includes local government, of course, the 2015 Climate Act mandated that all public sector employers needed to produce plans to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. But most of that work needs to be done by 2030, and that's often overlooked. So people kind of think we've got a lot of time, but our own research and all the research that's done around this area is very clear that if we don't do the majority of that work by 2030, then it will cost a huge amount more financially, because you haven't got the early wins of some of the things that will actually save money that you can then reinvest in the next stages of things that are harder to achieve, but also just the damage done that isn't mitigated against yet, that isn't adapted to yet, will cost more money. So there are large-scale, multi-year transition plans already being drawn up and implemented, and some of our members aren't aware of them, even if they're happening in their own workplaces. There are physical changes to workplaces, there are new ways of working being introduced, and the way our services are delivered will be, and already is, changing. But what we're finding is that worker voice on what's changing and how it's changing has largely been neglected to date. And that's where we think we need to absolutely be highlighting the need for worker voice to be at the heart of any changes to our members' jobs and the services they provide. So this is just a very quick example of the West of England Climate and Ecological Strategy. This is their action plan for 2023, but it runs to 2026, and then they have another 3 years of planning to do after that. It's really just an example of how large scale some of the changes that are already running are. So majority of the things in this plan are already implemented, some of them are completed and they're going on to the next stage. But just so you can have a very quick look at how many things are covered, and I don't expect you to be able to read all of that, but essentially just to illustrate that every service is being covered, and that when you go into the detail of each of those subheadings, there's another whole load of areas that are changing. Everything that we do is changing, and it's happening already, and it's going to be an ongoing process. So what's UNISON doing to support this agenda, to support our members getting engaged and involved and build capacity to get involved in this agenda? So in 2020, all of our work on climate change was pulled together into the Green Unison campaign. And I'd recommend you go onto our website and search for Green Unison, and you should get taken to the front page where you'll find access to all of our resources on that. And then in 2022, we formally changed our rules to make the branch environmental officer position a elected position, formal position in every branch that needs to be advertised and elected to. And that complements a green rep role. So you can be either. And we've kind of been a little bit unclear about this, but just we're going to be adding some clarity hopefully soon, but certainly we've bottomed it out now that essentially we want it to run like health and safety officer. We want there to be a formal branch environmental officer role, but as many local green reps in local workplaces to sort of support that role and become a working network on the ground as well. So we've had an inaugural environmental officers seminar just at the end of last year. We have regional networks for green reps. Some of them are really well established, and the rest are going to become well established by the end of this very important year. And those are set up essentially so that our green reps can share ideas and get support, share what works, share what doesn't work, and then escalate questions and ideas up to the centre so that we have a better idea as well. When we then meet as a regional rep contracts network, we can establish what our members need, what people need locally on the ground, what's the next kind of bit of advice or guidance that we can produce that might be helpful. We have a national newsletter which is open to all members. Really recommend you sign up to that, because at the moment it's kind of the only way you'll stay updated about what we're doing. It goes out between 6 and 8 times a year, and that'll be where you'll find out what we're doing and how you can get engaged. And we have a new comprehensive toolkit and bargaining guide, which is really quite extensive, but essentially that's because it's a pick and mix. It can be as little or as much as you need it to be. It aims to be something where you can just pick up a very simple action and run with that, but you can also go all the way through it to being supported and guided into how to set up joint forums for negotiating, which I know Sam will touch on from his experience as a branch green rep as well. So then we have training for activists. We have general training, local government and health specific training for our environmental officer roles, and we expect to have more coming online. We have begun to have bite-sized modules for members because we recognise this is an area, it's kind of not business as usual. It's not where people in trade unions necessarily expected to be talking about climate change, and it can be off-putting in terms of complexity or anxiety even. And so we recognise we need to build capacity right at the start with bite-sized modules for members to show them what's going on and how they can get engaged. We have an annual Green Unison Week that's been running for about 6 years, where in mid-September every year we put on a few webinars or events, and we encourage every branch and every member to get involved and engaged in any way they can. And of course we lobby governments to meet the challenges that they must meet from their end as well. So that's more the policy side of things. And of course we now have this 2026 year of green activity, which this webinar is a part of. So just to briefly, and I will be brief now before I pass over to Neve, outline the objectives and what we're doing for the year of green activity. The objectives are to highlight why climate change is a core trade union issue, particularly for public services. So a lot of what I've just gone through in the previous slides, which isn't necessarily well understood by our wider membership until we are able to highlight it and sort of explain it. To showcase what we're already doing, because we're actually doing quite a lot and have been for some time, but a lot of it is kind of largely unseen. To provide engagement and activity points every month, to promote the environmental officer role and the support that's available to them and to the members and branches, to promote the bargaining guide, to encourage branches to add Green Unison to their agendas, because this issue, as I've explained, is not going away. There are huge plans that are going to be affecting everything up until 2050, essentially, will be transformation plans on this topic. And to encourage newsletter sign-ups, as I've explained, it's one of the only ways of updating our members on our work. So this is, again, not something I expect anyone to be able to read, but it's just an illustration of the central schedule of events that we're laying on for this year of green activity. And as I say, I don't expect you to be able to read it, but this is what it looks like when you go onto our website. You'll know you found it because it looks a bit like this. And just to run through what you can see on there, what you can't see on there, there are launch materials. There's a whole pack of launch materials, including inspiration lists for members and branches to have a look at for just the kind of ideas separate to any year-wide agreed plan of action. They're just suggestion lists for small and large areas of activity that you as an individual member or you as a branch could consider taking up over the next year and beyond. And you'll find those lists there. And there's also other resources that you can use. There's a special lunchtime training module, and that's a pre-record. We haven't done anything like this before, so it's a bit of an experiment, but it's a pre-recorded workshop, essentially, where a branch can just book a room, invite all members. It runs itself. It would need to have a chair afterwards, and then there's a period after the roughly 35 minutes of presentation where there's a set of questions, and essentially it's an opportunity, having heard what you've heard in the workshop, and it is a real beginner's workshop, so it goes through the basics of climate change as well as leading through to what it means for our members and our branches. But it gives that time for people to then discuss next steps and what you might want to do next now that you've sort of heard all of that. So it'll be interesting to get feedback on how that's gone at the end of the year as well. But it's available now as part of our launch materials for branches to just book a room and run with it. We have political engagement opportunities on winnable issues like maximum workplace temperature, better investment in public transport, and there's 4 of those throughout the year, so take a look at those. We have dedicated highlight months like this one to showcase the impacts on particular sectors and particular equality groups. And there's 12 to 14 seminars planned in total, and we're aiming to have a rolling 3 months of those available to register to. So the first 3 months are up there now for people to explore and sign up to. We have a special mini film festival, because where we'd normally have our Green Unison week, we've got this whole year. And so as well as there are highlight webinars and things like that, but we'll also be running this special. We've got permission to show a sort of selection of 3 very different films, one of which is a short film, throughout that period, and to also then have a bit of a webinar to discuss, because there'll be some communal screenings, and also the opportunity for some of them to be just run directly in the branch as well, book a room, show the film. But some of them need to be communal screenings because of the licenses we've got, but we'll have a chance to talk about them later. So go on the website, you'll see information about the films and a link to trailers as well. And there'll be social media engagement to mark key dates. We've got special plans for Refugee Week, and we'll also be marking Earth Day, but there'll be others as well. And they'll look out for the editorial content throughout the year in sort of the Unison magazines and activists and branch information that gets sent out, because there should be other highlights and other sort of focus points throughout the year. And all of our regions and sectors and equality groups might have their own separate plans. They're encouraged to, and I know many are drawing up or planning separate activities to the central schedule of activities. So do look out for those as well, because although this is for local government their key highlight month, it doesn't mean it's the only thing they're doing to mark the year green activity. There will be other things throughout the year as well. And then we'll of course be doing the usual policy and research work to further our objectives in this area and the campaigning in this area as well. So that's a quick run through, and yeah, I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'm going to pass you over now to Niamh, who's our lead on climate change in local government. Thanks, Niamh.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So yes, I'm just going to share my slides. Hopefully everyone can see that. But I'm just going to be talking today about kind of some of the factors affecting local government's work on the climate crisis, and then introduce some examples of green projects in local government, which I think show both kind of the unique value of the sector in delivering green projects and also the impact they can have on local places, local people. So firstly, I think it's pretty impossible to speak about the impacts of climate change on local government without mentioning severe weather. This is probably the most obvious example of the climate crisis having real world impacts today. And as recently as this month, we've seen Storm Goretti, which had significant impacts on infrastructure. But the impacts on local government and local government workers is twofold. So UNISON saw in a recent branch survey that 98% of branches have experienced one or more severe weather events in the last 3 years, with storms, floods, and heat waves being the most reported types of severe weather. This survey also found that these events pose risks to members and staff with branches reporting dangerous travelling conditions, dangerous working conditions, and strain on services as the most common risks. I think this really neatly shows that local government workers, as key workers during these events, are not only called upon to kind of take personal risks in order to continue to deliver local services, but are also providing additional services during these events. So this is something which was reported as particularly significant for members in the social care sector, mainly that social care workers are a lifeline for service users during these events, but that there is a particular lack of support to mitigate dangerous and unavoidable travel. There were some encouraging signs from the survey that emerged, with 65% of branches reporting their local authority did have a severe weather plan. But I think there is something that we'll continue to work on, in that we want to see more employers developing these plans, ensuring members are consulted on changes to policies in these areas, and ensuring plans are specific to the service and the type of severe weather, but also that they make provision for staff with protected characteristics. I think another kind of significant kind of factor impacting local government work on the climate crisis is threats by Reform UK. So at this point, this quote by Farage has kind of become infamous when talking about the Reform UK agenda in regard to the climate crisis. And we've seen members in Reform UK controlled councils worried about their jobs, renaming departments and repackaging green projects as cost saving or efficiency projects. So while this is kind of a direct threat to local government sustainability officers in particular, there are also members kind of in third sector partners, so in charities, that kind of work on projects in partnership with local authorities that can rely on local authority funding. They're also kind of feeling this impact. And as we kind of predict, well, everyone's predicting that Reform UK are kind of going to become a more significant political player in local government, and increasing numbers of councillors are defecting to reform. We expect this agenda to continue to kind of influence local government action on the climate crisis. I think another kind of significant and more kind of long-term threat to kind of work in this area is kind of around local government financing and how it interacts with some green financing as well. So Unison's annual kind of analysis of freedom of information data and council's medium-term financial strategies shows local authorities across the three nations, so that's England, Scotland and Cymru, face a predicted collective funding gap of about 1.4 billion for 26-27. So council budgets are already kind of not stretching to cover existing services, and the impact of this kind of lack of money really is kind of further exacerbated by complex funding systems for green projects, which do rely heavily on grant systems. And this really limits local authorities' ability to plan and conduct long-term multi-year climate projects. It also impacts kind of skills development within local authorities. We've also seen the axing of some central government funding streams. So this month we've seen the announcement of the sunsetting of the public sector decarbonisation scheme, and the government hasn't committed to replace it. As of yet, there could be news in that area, and we don't know. So again, this is directly affecting members in councils, but also the third sector who rely on grants to conduct green projects. Another kind of factor that we're seeing as affecting local government workers is the growth of AI in local government. So this is a factor which is regularly raised by members to us, and I think the concern has grown around this for a few different reasons. I think number one is the rapid expansion of the technology, and more members in local government are being encouraged to use it as a way to kind of boost productivity and inform decision making. And there has kind of been this expansion of government investment in AI. And I think for climate work in particular, people are becoming increasingly aware of the negative environmental effects of AI use. So things like high emissions, high water use. And so I think it's kind of bred this kind of concern around this particular issue. We do kind of know that AI is an emerging technology, so it's really difficult to find the information both about around how much it is being used day to day in local authorities, and also what is the direct environmental impact of this use. There are various kind of opinions around its benefits and risks, but for our purposes, it really is this reporting about its use and this being reflected in emissions reporting. And this is kind of important because we really just don't know the direct impact. So I think, while these are kind of more general risks, there are some kind of more sector and employer specific risks that are kind of also important to mention. So, for example, the local government kind of service group covers a few of these employers. So Food Standards Agency, they're kind of on the forefront of tackling quite complex issues around changing food availability and working through issues around food security. For social workers, on the front lines of helping vulnerable people, including older people who we know are like at increased risk of the effects of climate change, including severe weather. This is also a sector that has to grapple with complex issues around the climate crisis, which climate change is having an effect on. For fire and rescue support staff, increasing instances of wildfires in the UK, and they are a first responder in times of severe weather. So as severe weather becomes more extreme, there's added pressure to the service. And for the police, there's decarbonisation of the fleet is a key challenge for the sector. So these are all kind of things to think about when thinking about the effects of climate change on local government. I also wanted to, as part of the presentation, kind of touch on some examples of green projects in local government, which kind of demonstrate what can be achieved in the sector, but also kind of demonstrate why it's so important local authorities continue to support green projects. So kind of one that I picked out is kind of Plymouth City Council's Ocean City Nature project. So this is a project, it's award-winning, and it's all around kind of enhancing recreational areas to increase biodiversity. So it's about kind of attracting investment to protect and restore targeted habitats that are then managed through local decision making and skills development in the area. So this is done through offering developments the opportunity to purchase these units of habitat banks as a way to meet their biodiversity obligations. These areas are then managed in order to generate revenue, increase the biodiversity, and grow the local economy, and kind of meet social needs of residents. I think this is a particularly helpful example in thinking about kind of what is the value add by local authorities being involved in projects like this. So, for example, this is an example where the local authority has taken leadership to leverage their position as long-term partners within the local area and investors. And this means that these areas of biodiversity, they have to be delivered by the developments, but by local authorities taking leadership, they're able to do this both more strategically, so able to target specific habitats and deliver it in a way that is more responsive to local need. Another example that I wanted to kind of draw on was the North London Heat and Power project. So this is a partnership by 7 local authorities, and the idea is to turn waste, which is left over from higher recycling rates, to generate electricity. So the project's investing in the facility to take on more waste, and this marks kind of quite a significant investment in greener waste facilities. So yeah, the stats are on the screen, but it's estimated that with this increased capacity, that electricity could be generated for up to 127,000 homes and supply hot water and heating for up to 60,000 local homes and businesses. They're also incorporating newer technologies like carbon capture technology and storage at the park, and have kind of projects involved in community outreach and green jobs. There's also another project in Scotland. So this is the local authority covering the Western Isles of Scotland, and they've been working to develop a strategy to divert 100% of the island's non-recyclable fuel from landfill and turn it into alternative fuel. Again, the climate impacts are on the screen, but there are quite significant kind of impacts in terms of saving carbon and diverting waste from landfill, and also stopping the current practice of waste having to be removed to the mainland in order to treat it. I think both of these examples are kind of show how local authority partnerships can be leveraged to deliver kind of significant investment in green technology and generate kind of more long-term and sustainable development of both infrastructure in local places, but also skills to deliver these projects. And they're kind of taking services that local authorities already deliver and greening them. So to kind of summarise, local government is on the front line of climate change, whether that is through delivering key services through the effects of things like severe weather or grappling with complex challenges caused by climate change. They're also working on decarbonising energy systems and delivering services more sustainably. Several factors do kind of threaten progress on the climate crisis, including the threat of reform, local government finance, and the rise of AI. But the sector is still kind of delivering innovative and impactful projects, and the UK government and devolved governments should be providing more support to go further so that local authorities can deliver benefits for local places through things like skills, infrastructure, and the greening of services. So yes, that's all from me. I think we're going to take questions at the end, but yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Neve. So yes, that's quite a good in-depth report of what's happening right now and a good summary of the different issues involved. Do please keep on putting your questions in the Q&A if you have any. We've got a few, but it'd be always great to have more. And I'm going to pass over to you now, Sam. Thank you.
Brilliant. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Sam Perry. The role is Policy Officer at the Trades Union Congress. My focus there at the moment is on the Warmer Homes Plan, which you may have seen came out today. It's about retrofitting homes, make them more energy efficient, less carbon intensive. So I'm sort of in the background frantically looking through that document to make sure it says all the right things. But that's within the context of my broader role, which is about green organising more generally, and previous roles with the TC and elsewhere have been on that as well. So I focused in, I was in North East Yorkshire and Humber region of the TC, and then before that, as Michelle said at the top, I was a UNISON environmental officer. That was when I was working out of a housing department in a local authority, in Harrogate local authority. And I mean, having seen all those resources that Michelle went through, I've heard a summary of that. That was also described as a summary of events over this year, but I wish I had all that back then when I worked there. It looks fantastic. So yeah, really well done on pulling all that together. Yeah, I just want to, so I mean, I was an environment officer. I was a green rep because I'm passionate about this. I'm passionate about the environment. And I think having been it and then also now seen that role in multiple perspectives, you know, from different levels in the trade union movement, it feels huge. It feels like it's got all this massive potential. I got into it originally because I'm a passionate climate activist. Personally, that's because I'm driven by socialist impulses. I'm a socialist, and I can see that the world is sort of ending all around us, and society has very little to offer us other than use different bins or shop in more expensive local shops or buy an electric car or do a green job, whatever that is. And I had this sense, well, that's obviously not the solution, and maybe a properly organized economy, an economy that was listening to workers, that was listening to the best advice out there, could just solve some of these problems relatively easily. So I saw this as kind of a political problem, a problem of people not doing what was in their best interest, in their class interest. Well, anyway, so I got elected as a Green Rep. and I sort of took that as permission to crack on and do what I could in the local authority. There was this idea of staff green group that had been put into a policy document at some point in the past, didn't really go anywhere. So I said, that's the thing, we'll make that happen. I'll do that, I'll set that up. So I managed to get buy-in from sustainability officers who were, to be honest, glad of the allies, and of members who wanted that representation and feel like they were being listened to and feel like they were influencing policy, and from management as well, who needed to actualize that phrase that had gone into a policy document from before. So we got all that together. We agreed to terms of reference. My responsibility was staff issues, which I guess for some felt like restricting what the trade union was doing, but actually, I mean, everything's a staff issue, right? I mean, that's day one. So that gave us quite a big scope to be able to talk about a lot of stuff across the organisation. And we got to work, and I think we got quite a lot done. So in that first year, I've got a bit of a list. We created mandatory carbon literacy training for new starters. We created a sub-site on the intranet, staff intranet, to provide empowering information and grow support for our efforts and educate colleagues on climate change stuff, and also what they could do, how they could do their job greener, and also to kind of push some of the the slightly edgier items that we want to stress. We also expanded recycling, what was collected in the offices, and inexplicably, recycling wasn't collected from all the different sites that the council had, and so we sorted that out. We did electric vehicle charging points, priority parking, and a car share scheme with priority parking bays. Revamped that and got a lot more people involved in that, which is great. It's also quite a sociable thing, car share schemes. I quite like that innovation or that intervention that we did. We sorted out security for bike sheds. The bike sheds bikes kept getting nicked, and so we just put in it's because it was open at the top, so we put a roof on basically, and it solved that problem and it allowed people to cycle to work. And it's those kind of, like, there was a really boring solution to a problem that just allowed people to be a lot more green in what they were doing. Another one of those was we put a valeting service, or we bought a valeting service for the pool cars, the EV pool cars. These were cars that people could take on visits around the district, and no one wanted to use the EVs that we had there. They preferred to use their own cars because they were just filthy. They were never looked after, and so we valeted them, and people therefore started using them. We also did other things. We got staff green group representation on key procurement panels. We got environment impact assessments on various internal procurement things, and we created a carbon footprint report, with metrics that we sort of defined, that was regularly circulated among all staff to keep everyone accountable, basically, kind of push for further action. We also negotiated benefits for new colleagues. So we got employee deals with zero waste shops nearby. We got an expansion of public transport tickets, season tickets. We got EV purchasing, salary sacrifice, mileage rates for bikes. We got a pool EV bike, which was a fun thing to have. And we also raised lots of awareness and support. We did these events, we did these kind of stalls, we did education sessions, and we did a most impactfully, I think, a sort of tree planting session event with a plaque. You got to have the plaque. If you don't have the plaque, people just think they're trees, not trees for a purpose. And so, yeah, it was, I mean, obviously in the grand scheme of things, planting trees isn't solving the problem, but I think because it managed to get people there, because we got some press coverage, because we got members active, but also others seeing them, the UNISON members doing this initiative, I think it had quite a big impact. And that I quite like the idea that this plaque, which was set at floor level, people will be tripping over that for years to come, but then they'll hopefully look back and see it and see, UNISON were part of this effort. They were taking climate change seriously, and taking action off their own back. That could have been quite an expensive project. Trees are quite expensive to buy, and land is expensive, but we managed to negotiate the land from the council. It was a park in town, and the trees, we were actually ready to pay. The members had sort of agreed to fork out, but we then spoke to a local councillor who was able to use his ward budget, which is their allocation of money, to just pay for that. So it ended up costing us nothing other than time, and it was quite a fun thing to do. So it didn't really cost us anything. But there was lots more we didn't do, and I guess looking back on it, I wish like we'd been able to do more. Since working with the TUC, we've expanded what we call the Greener Workplaces Toolkit, which is a little bit like your toolkit. I think they borrow some of the same resources. And part of the reason I wanted to do that was sort of as my apology for not having been able to do everything in that role. It's my sort of how to do it properly guide. There's lots of UNISON case studies in there, actually, as well as other trade unions are available too. We also didn't really politicize this enough. I started at the top there saying that I'm coming at this from a left-wing perspective. I think this is a class issue, etc. We didn't really do all that much in when I was a Green rep, and I wish we had. I think that political education, that class agitation, that reaching out to other organisations that have that same drive would have been really helpful. We didn't really do that, and I wish we had. And I think in the TC, I also then went on to create the Just Transition Network for the North East Yorkshire and Humber, which is this group of activists that come together, Green reps from across different unions, and a little bit like the UNISON versions of these, talk about challenges and opportunities and exchange intel and what works and what doesn't work, and plan interventions and campaigns and things. Anyway, that Just Transition Network was partly because I didn't really feel like I had that support. I didn't know what other councils were doing. I didn't know what other colleagues in other organisations, unionised organisations, were doing. And so I created that Just Transition Network as sort of, to ensure that would be available for other Green reps in the future. And I guess, I mean, that was a bit of a list about what we did. But I think more generally, green organising just can be huge. And I think maybe hopefully that's a bit of a flavour of it. We also got a little bit of that from the previous presentation, which was brilliant. It's something that puts unionists, or can put unionists, in the driving seat for the sort of future of their organisation, which is not a position we're normally in, right? It makes us these kind of, I use the phrase proactive agents of change sometimes, which sounds a bit, but we're often reactive. We have to react to particular issues and redundancies, and everything's always a panic. This is the opposite. It's kind of socialist change management. We start with where we want to be, and we sort of set up the steps to get there, and win each fight on the way. And I think that makes it hugely empowering for both individuals, but also for individual branches as well, for branches that kind of feel like they're setting the strategy for their workplace. It lets you do whatever you want, and it lets you do whatever you want for your members. It lets members put them in the driving seat. And I think even more so, like health and safety or something is a little bit more narrow what you're doing, but climate change is everything now because we're not winning on this. And so, it lets you take anything that you're interested in, really run with it. And I see that in workplaces that I've supported in the TUC. Lots of workplaces are doing well on this. Lots of UNISON workplaces, they have joint environmental committees, which Michelle mentioned, which are these committees where management and trade unions are sitting down to define the strategy going forward. Lots of green reps in climate champion schemes, which councils often have and other public sector employers often have. Lots of green reps have facility time now. Obviously, this isn't one of these things that's required by law, like for health and safety reps, but it has been negotiated lots of times now. It can be done. If you don't have it, just ask. It can be done. And we're doing great. We're seeing great outreach, great reach between workplaces and civil society as well. I mentioned health and safety, but health and safety is becoming increasingly climate health and safety. We saw from some of those stats earlier that just being in this world is becoming more dangerous. And so the alliance between health and safety and trade union green reps is growing, and it's great to see that. And it feels like for me, it feels like the future of the movement. It feels like this is a slightly different type of unionist who are often involved in this. It's often younger people, it's often socialists, it's often lefties in our movement who don't otherwise sort of feel like they necessarily have a place. It's often more diverse demographics. It's the school strikers from a few years ago. It's the rebels and the intersectional justice activists. And I think that gives it a kind of vibrancy, which is exciting. And I think for me, I mean, hopefully I've kind of touched on this a bit, so it's not going to be a huge surprise, but it's about confronting capitalism directly. This is the alternative to business as usual. And I think that makes it quite an exciting area. It's quite important. It's a little bit difficult and dangerous, but it's also inclusive and modern. And I think in a world where everything needs to change, everything has this carbon footprint, everything is problematic. Green reps, you as green reps, are the people in trade unions who can actually change that. So I'm really glad you're all here, and I wish you all the best with everything that you are, I'm sure, already doing, but everything that you will do in the future as well. Thanks.
Great, thanks very much, Sam. We do have quite a few questions, and we've got just over 10 minutes to get to some of them. So hopefully we might even get to all of them. I will just say that I've got some kind of glitch and I haven't been able to see them all, but my colleague in the background, fantastic Nikki, has been sending them on to me. So hopefully I've got most of them in front of me. I think I'll start with a couple directly for you, Sam, as you've just spoken. It kind of, maybe that's easier as well. One of the first questions was relating to the new announcement on the Warm Homes Plan, and simply, are we ready for this? So, that's squarely for you, I'm glad to say, because I haven't had a chance to look at all the detail yet, although I do know that our energy sector was slightly involved, and I'm sure the TUC was slightly consulted. Whether they've given us what we asked for, I don't know yet. And the other question for you, particularly, Sam, was about the sustainability staff network that you talked about. Is there a terms of reference that you found useful or have shared? We're going to give a link to the TUC toolkit that you mentioned. There might be something in there, but specifically one of the questions on that was it just for UNISON members because you had that UNISON hat, or was it an all staff bit of guidance? So if we start off with those, and then there's a couple of more general things that I'll move on to.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, on the Warm Homes Plan, it's not perfect, but it's there, and there's quite a lot of detail there, which which I'm still, as I say, going through, but I'm sure you'll go through as well. It's a relatively well-rounded thing, and we've been working quite closely with DESNES, which is the department that's looking at this, over a period of time, as have individual union colleagues. To try and make sure there's the right stuff in there. It does have quite a nice jobs focus. I think from a local government point of view, it's very positive, actually. They've seen the home upgrades delivered through local authorities, so with the kind of like, through local authorities, have worked better than home upgrades done privately or through individual companies, and so they're looking to expand that. So there's already quite a lot of money in through that system, through social housing decarbonisation fund and things, but they're looking to basically expand that. It's a big scheme. It's £15 billion, which is a lot of money, and most of that being channeled through local authorities is a fantastic opportunity. The big caveat for us, and maybe for you as well, is that at the moment, a lot of the jobs associated with this are being outsourced, right? So the local authority is employing private individuals who aren't on good terms, often aren't in unions, et cetera, et cetera. That shouldn't be the case. Make the case in your workplaces to bring them in, or at least share terms. On the staff network, I could potentially share the terms of reference for that if I can dig them out somewhere. But in the Greener Workplaces Toolkit that I referred to, the TUC document, there is a joint environment committee sort of draft terms of reference or draft motion to support a terms of reference, which is a similar thing. And so that can be used to kind of set these things up. The way we did it in Harrogate was it was an all staff thing, which UNISON, as the biggest union in the in the employer ended up running. But which other unionists were invited to. So GMB were also active in the and sent members along, and there were non-aligned members as well as part of that. And I think that actually worked better because UNISON itself doesn't run the council, right? So you need officers in that place to be able to action our fantastic ideas.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a fair few questions that I would say are probably more directed at the wider Unison work. So I'll just take a couple of those if that's all right. So one of the questions was, what's the difference between environmental officer role, a green rep role, and this particular person is also their job is to be a sustainability officer. And so the question of overlap between those things. So it has been confusing for us because we had green reps spring up. I mean, Sam was a green rep before we formalised the environmental officer role within Unison. We had people stepping up to sort of take over that function because they knew it needed doing, really, and we sort of encouraged that. But in forming the officer position, I think the actual wording that ended up being in our rule book, I think, has been unhelpful because it says or green rep, and I don't think it was supposed to say that. So essentially, we've had discussions this year, and we will be coming out and being much more clear about the fact that there is the electable position that is a branch committee position equal to the other branch committee positions of the environmental officer, but that a green rep is just like a local health and safety rep, and essentially you can have one per workplace. You can have as many as you want, and so if you don't feel ready yet to take on the full role, or if that role is already filled, that's best case scenario, then you can be part of the group of people who are willing to spend some time and engage on this issue, particularly within the branch. And so we will be putting out more specific guidance on the role. But essentially, even the environmental officer role, we're really clear as a new role, amongst all of our other roles, really, that this can be as little or as much as you want to make of it. I mean, that's quite often the case with a lot of the branch officer roles. At first, if you feel underconfident, new to the role, it can be a contact point for people who want to ask questions, for people who want to explore a bit of activity, report issues, and it can grow from there with support and training and all of that. And there is a sort of nice interplay sometimes for people whose full-time job might be directly linked to roles in climate change and in getting to net zero. We found that certainly one of our sustainability officers in local government reported to us that they found it quite helpful when they were pushing for the necessary changes to be able to say, well, and I know the union thinks the same thing. And that's because they were also the environmental officer role, so they could use that to make sure that the branch was backing up actually what was the main responsibilities and duties. So it can be very helpful. I don't imagine it is not without some kind of rub as well in terms of confidentiality and all those things. But yes, certainly we're going to come out with more clarity on that. There's a question about carbon literacy training. It's not something in those terms that we've put on, but I noticed, Sam, that you mentioned you ensured that the employer laid it on. And I think that's the right way to go. If you go to the Carbon Literacy Trust, which started out just to cover Manchester and then has become this charitable organisation that kind of lays on training and sort of explores carbon literacy training more widely, any employer can go to them and decide that they're going to lay it on. It's also something carbon literacy training in schools, and of course we have members in schools, so I know that we're going to be doing work on encouraging that. At one point was going to be mandatory within schools, and that's been watered down slightly. Before the last government went, that was watered down, but it's certainly something that we're keen, and a lot of schools are doing it anyway, even though it's no longer mandatory. So yeah, it's something that we would encourage a negotiation with employers to put on for staff, absolutely. But what we've done in our space, and the TUC are probably doing theirs and other unions are doing as well, is we have our own bits of training as well. And this bite-sized module that can be run in workshops is a beginner's kind of explainer and the beginning of a carbon literacy module, if you like, that people can pick up and run with now. There's a question about public investment versus private. Yeah, we have a very strong view about that. Our formal position is absolutely there should be public investment because we should have learnt the lessons of what happens when it isn't. Unfortunately, we're just not making any progress on that right now. And the work needs to be done and needs to be done at pace. It's something we'll continue to push on. It's not something we're making, unfortunately, the best headway for so far. The information about cost of doing nothing. We've got a piece of robust research being done by the Labour Research Department that we hope to be The draft of it is almost ready, and then hopefully it'll come out in the next few weeks, that goes into the detail of that. But actually our own research in 2022, which you can find on our website still, goes into some of that. What's the cost of not doing those things now? What's the cost of not doing things versus the cost of doing things? So there will be more information coming out on there, and we already have some of that information. There's also a question about some of the facts that were mentioned, the stark facts at the beginning. What I would recommend is, I was lucky enough to attend the National Emergency Briefing, which was a fantastic event with very high level scientists covering very different areas. And you can they've now, since that event, taken down each speaker on their website. If you go to the National Emergency Briefing website, they're about 8 to 10 minutes each, these presentations from very renowned scientists into a lot of the different topics. But the one on the changing climate, particularly for the UK, and actually it was about the whole of global change, was Professor Tim Lenton, and the one about food supply and the impacts, interchange between climate and food supply, was Professor Paul Behrens. But you'll see them there. There's about 8 speakers, absolutely top-notch presentations. And it was 3 hours there, but you can break it down into the individual 10 minutes that are of interest to you. But I absolutely recommend that people take a look at those. We'll be publishing those on our website, and also doing some work with the emergency briefing team on a film that they would like to collaboratively share with organisations, and they'll be speaking to the TUC about whether other organisations, other unions would want to have some screenings of that as well. So that's just a recommendation for more information. Where it's not the only place we get our information. And I'm not someone who's got a degree or a professorship in climate change. That's not how policy work is. I'm a generalist, but I make sure that I get information from the best sources, and a number of sources that we can. So on that note, just really encourage everyone to get involved with the rest of the Year Green activity. There are so many ways that people can engage. Head to our website and you'll see them all. And there are many more of these webinars. And I just really want to thank Sam and Neve for presenting their unique perspectives today as well, and very much the local government specific perspective, which is of course the subject of this particular webinar. So thanks everyone for joining. I think that's probably all we have time for in terms of questions, but they covered the ones that I was able to get before question period started. So thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for giving up your lunch break to us.